we all agree to. But at least we feel comfortable raising this question. That would be a tremendous advancement. You know, hey, we're having a civil conversation about a very important issue. And we can have a safe environment having this conversation. That would be tremendous. Also, as
I wrote it, I had the same answer.
Yeah.
I said, I wrote down EO, existential objective, experiential objective, Mercury again. Pleased to see can actually have a meaningful conversation on a tough subject. You know, I mean, it's tough.
it's tough stuff.
You hope a group feels like that they really had a meaningful conversation.
That's a good
Not that they solved it.
Yeah.
In our previous class, and it made a lot of sense, we talked about topics that some people, no matter what you say,
Good luck, Decorah.
Goodbye. Sing it hard.
no matter what you say, or no matter what support you give to your argument, the person will not go along with it because they have a core belief that they don't associate with it. So it doesn't really matter what you say to support it. You're not going to convince them otherwise. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
I kind of wonder, when you get to these topics, I think that's an avenue that you may have to think about no matter what you support or with. I mean, you could talk about, abortion, and some people that are against it, I don't care what statistic you give them about abortion, they're not going to say it's okay, thanks for filling me in, thanks for showing me all these good things.
But you as the facilitator, you're saying to yourself, what do you hope will happen to the group? You're hoping that you're going to be able to move somebody like that to more openness. It may not happen.
Will you try?
Yeah, you try. That's what you're trying to write here, is your intent.
Okay.
What is your intent as a facilitator with the groups having this conversation? That's what the experiential objective is trying to ask you to think about. And remember, even if you don't ever articulate to yourself what your objectives are, if you're a facilitator having a conversation, you have an objective, you just haven't thought about it. So what this is trying to do is to help you just write out, what are your intents? Why are you having this conversation? By the way, I just, a little parenthetically, Congressman Rush and Davis want to have this conversation. It's pretty common. And it occurred to me, the author of this should send this to the two congressmen and say, here's a format for your meeting.
Oh,
By the way, just keep that in mind.
I want to let you know about something. There's a group of us SML students, graduate students that are working in the community on the Austin community and the West Side. And we have, it's a group doing community-based research. And we're presenting at a conference in New Mexico in the fall and a conference in Kentucky in the fall. And one of the subcategories, we're looking at food insecurity, i.e. hunger. We're looking at joblessness, and we're looking at violence and crime, and some other subcategories that we had up. And I would love for this person to join our group, our research group, because we're getting a lot of notoriety. We'll be meeting with Reverend Sharpton. We'll be meeting with Danny Davis, is actually helping us with our funding to go to these conferences to present and things like that. And when I saw this posted, I was like, why isn't that person on our team?
Well,
but you know what about this?
yeah.
When I saw this, I thought, this is a great conversation. I mean, this topic and how it's laid out with the different questions is great for a group of friends at a restaurant, having dinner to discuss. But you can also, okay, so that's one end of the spectrum, but then you can also have an entire 2-day weekend conference,
Yeah.
in some rooms at the Palmer House with different sessions and discuss this. I mean, it's just such a broad spectrum discussion issue. And I thought small, tiny scale facilitation, huge, grand scale facilitation, and everything in between. So I have to tell that person bravo.
All right. Let's look at the opening. Now the opening is, just to and refresh you. This is what you as the facilitators were to say, and just set the context for why this group, why are we here today having this conversation. And what's here in the opening box reads, what are some of the ways in which you think our legislators and citizens can participate in decreasing the crime rates in Chicago, and you think our legislators are doing enough? And what strikes you about that opening statement?
Making a supposition that possibly citizens, all citizens, legislators, as well as regular citizens can come together to try to, pose some solutions or some strategies to combat the violence.
Okay. It's making an assumption that the citizens can come together, which is a good assumption. We hope that would be the case, but it is an assumption. What else strikes you about that statement?
It encourages the bridging of the gap and encourages dialogue between government, i.e. legislation, and just regular citizens.
What else strikes you notice about this opening statement? Context setting. Well, I mentioned a couple of things that struck me. One is there's one sentence, but it's actually two questions. And the second question is a yes or no question. And, and there's a lot in there. I was trying to figure out how this could be perhaps edited. And actually, I'm not sure. Oh, go ahead, Karen.
I was going to say, in my mind, the opening and closing are not questions.
They're not?
You know how you could say, well, how do I get started on this? That's what the opening is. How do I get started? So I really like the idea of having a conversation where I would say, I'd like us to talk about how we as citizens can participate in decreasing the crime rates in Chicago.
It can be that straightforward.
Yeah, it can be. And so you kind of set it up.
Set it up. But you could set that by asking the question.
You can.
But you don't want to confuse that setup with one of the questions that you're going to ask in the conversation.
Exactly.
You get folks
You're not
confused.
expecting them to answer a question in the opening.
Right.
You could say, I've been thinking about how can we as citizens participate in decreasing the crime rates in Chicago?
And
So let's talk about that for a little bit. And then you start with the questions that put ORID. So.
Okay, does this help you, Mary? All right, now let's take and for the sake of time, let's take a look at the 4 levels. And she's got the author has all 4 levels: the observe, the reflect, the interpret, and the decisional, the decide. The 4 levels of the conversation method, the ORID. You recall the observe level is sort of, just the facts, ma'am. The reflect level is more internalizing things. Interpreting is making sense or meaning out of it, and decision is what you're going to do about it. What, gut, so what, now what? Now, the 4 questions that are being posed here are in this sequence. How has the increasing crime rates in Chicago affected your life? Was there ever a time when you felt safe in the daytime, nighttime traveling throughout Chicago, and has this changed? Interpret, what do you appreciate most about living in Chicago, and what did you learn about yourself and your input or lack of input in making a difference? And the decisional is, what strategies do you think works when it comes to combating crime in Chicago, and how do you plan to use this conversation as a way to becoming more involved? Let me start with decisional. There's really 2 questions here. The first is on what are the strategies you think works, and the other one is how do you plan to use this conversation? And those are 2 perfectly good questions for that level, but the way it's actually phrased in this little box is as one question, and the participants might get confused. Well, which question are you asking? You know, so I would break them up into two distinct questions. I think both are valid, and I think both fit right there at the decisional level. So I want to applaud that. Would you agree, Karen?
Yes.
Okay. Just check.
Absolutely.
Does everyone see that?
Great question.
All right. Now let's go back and take a look at the other three. Based upon what I just said, what do you notice about the observe, reflect, or interpret?
On the reflect piece.
Yeah.
There are two questions.
Which is good. Check it too.
Yeah. Now, what? And the first question would be what, Barbara?
Was there ever a time you felt safe?
Safe in traveling throughout Chicago? Question mark. Stop right there. That's question one. Now let's take that question. What do you notice about that question?
Yes or no?
It's a yes or no. It's a closed-ended question. And you recall we wanted you to be working on open-ended questions. How could you take the question, was there ever a time when you felt safe in the daytime, nighttime traveling throughout Chicago, question mark, and change that to an open-ended question?
Say, when was it, or?
Describe the last time.
Describe the last time. Now, under the rubric of feeling safe, I think if I were the author, I would say felt unsafe. Because the topic of the conversation is about gun violence. When was the last time you felt unsafe traveling through Chicago? And it's open-ended and so forth. Okay. Then the second question, as Barbara pointed out, and has this changed? Well, again, it's a closed-ended question, yes or no. So how could you take that and make it an open-ended question? Here they are, the group around the table or whatever, around the dining room, at the restaurant, been talking about times when they felt unsafe. And now the follow-up question is,
Based on that example you just gave me, what would you do differently?
what would you do differently?
Or
That's
how
a
would you
decision,
different?
or actually it's an action.
How would you would you have changed anything from your childhood?
Susan, take a crack at it.
What do you think might have changed? Like, it says here, what, Andy has this changed. What would you say may have changed it?
From that point to
Right.
now.
What would be-
All right, so let's kind of hold that on the reflective level. There are two questions here. The first one is about people telling times when they felt unsafe. Now let's take a look at the observed question. How has the increasing crime rate in Chicago affected your life? And then interpret, when do you appreciate most about living in Chicago? And I think there are about three questions here.
What is it?
That interpretive level's got really three questions. Can you see you take out those ands and put a question mark there, you can see it. Okay, well, let's hold that thought. Now let's go back at the observed level. How has the increasing crime rates in Chicago affected your life? What do you notice about that question?
It's open-ended. I mean, it does let you say not just yes or no.
Yeah, it's true. It's an open-ended question.
It seems more of a reflective thing.
Jim, I thought the same thing. In fact, my thought here was that the observed level and reflect level are reversed. Now, I would start with when was as Hazel said, when was the last time you felt safe about traveling in Chicago? Start by them telling their own examples of unsafe. And then the observed level takes it a little deeper. How has that affected you? How has the increasing crime rate in Chicago affected you? And, the first time they're saying, well, you know, 2 months ago, I got out of my car at 11:30 at night and I got robbed. So that's a data point. That's a data point. Then, how has the increasing crime rates affected your life in Chicago? Man, we got, our block club has started a positive loitering campaign. You know, every Thursday night we get out there at 8 o'clock and we stand on the corner. I won't travel at night by myself anymore. You know, people, they take it a little deeper, a little more. So I think the observe and reflect level are reversed myself. By the way, I'm going to pause here a minute. The author of this conversation reported that when this person led the conversation, it was a terrific conversation, and I am sure it was, as it is already. What we're here doing is fine-tuning it. So I just want to point out that the conversation went terrific. Any other questions you have about the ORID sequence and some of the comments we've made here, and any other suggestions for improvement or just questions you have about what's presented?
I have one.
Yeah.
I remember you in the discussion board, I think you said it doesn't matter what order these are in. Is there a preferred order in which you would go?
Yes, the preferred order, or the default, is ORID. That's the default. And depending upon the situation, you'll discover, as I have over the years, I'll ask one question and we'll talk a little bit about it, and invariably the group starts answering the next question before I have officially asked it. And part of it is, remember, we are proposing to you that the ORID method is the natural thinking process of the human mind anyway. Therefore, it would be expected for them to sort of go on this journey of consciousness, if you please, regardless, and all you're doing is prompting it. And sometimes, you as a facilitator, I have noticed, that more often than not, I'm having to catch up with the group. Because they are already down the road, and I'm saying, wait a minute.
I have 3 more questions.
I have 3 more questions. You're not.
Forget that.
You are way ahead of me. So I have to remember, it's their conversation, not mine.
I think one of the most helpful things for you to keep in mind when you create a conversation is to practice, to go through your questions and answer them yourself, thinking about the group and what you think they might answer, or what you would answer, and all of a sudden you'll say, well, that's a hard one to answer. How can I rephrase that so it's easier for a person to respond? Or that, all of a sudden I find myself saying yes or no. Oh, I've got to rephrase that because I'm saying yes or no. So after you've done a conversation, the best thing to do is to go back and pretend that you're answering these questions and see whether you can.
We used to do that like whenever we had to do something in a group. For instance, if we had to reduce overtime, we would think about the group is going to be angry. We start taking their overtime away. What kind of questions are they going to come back at me with? And if they do, what am I going to say? Because if you stumble at that point, it looks bad. I mean, if you can come up with reasons. So, yeah.
John, I have a question. You say the ORID process is the natural thinking process of the mind, correct? I'm just curious, the probably was reading, I just forgot. When was that established, and who actually established that it is the natural thinking process?
Well, okay, yes, and I don't have the literature and references at the top of my head. It's in the notes from last week, or last time we got together. Karen, can you help me out on this at all?
We've heard it and we experience it works.
My corny illustration of that 2 weeks ago, when we did it, or was that 2 weeks ago?
Yes.
Was the illustration of throwing the ball. And what happens as one goes to First, human beings take in data through our senses, the 5 senses. That's how the human species functions. We observe, we see, we smell, we taste, we touch, we hear, etc. Then we process that by relating it to previous experiences in our life. And we make connections, relational level. And because of that, emotions dwell up within us. If a ball's being thrown at you pretty fast and hard and direct, maybe fear comes up. Whereas if it's being wafted softly as a rubber ball, it's more playful. But emotions occur. That's the reflective level also. Interpretive level is, what is the meaning of this? What is happening? And it just depends, of course, what that is. But we interpret the meaning of whatever that's coming into our senses. And based upon that meaning, we act. We respond. We catch the ball, let it hit us, or whatever the situation may be. And what this technique is trying to do is say to itself, if in fact that's more or less the natural thinking process, by leading a group of people in a conversation that follows that technique, it is as if the group is creating its own group consciousness of that experience. It is as if they're creating their own group mind about it, and group experience about it. Now, I want to make one other comment, and then we'll give the author of this conversation a quick reply. The closing asks some more questions. It occurs to me now that so did the opening. The opening and closing are not necessarily questions to be asked. They're just, the opening is setting a context, and the closing is saying, boy, thank you everybody for participating. This is really a smart group. I really look forward to seeing us put some of this into action.
Or summarizing the responses.
Or maybe it's a summary, making a summary. But you don't need to be asking any more questions. You might, but you don't need to. So everyone knows that this was Denise's, right? Let's give her a big hand. So how did it go, really? Tell us about
Well,
it.
it went well. I mean, it was a group of friends who I was very familiar with, and I know that they have a lot of input into social issues here in Chicago. And so I thought there was a good opportunity to apply this assignment with them. I told them ahead of time that I have the assignment.
You told me ahead of time.
But I didn't tell them what it about. But usually on a regular basis, we usually discuss the issues in Chicago.
That's great.
Even though it hasn't really touched many of us in a group, but we still have a concern. We were born here, and we still have a concern of what's going on in Chicago. And I thought everything went okay, and most of this that's on here, it's sort of like, and you comment on the opening part of this document, and you know, I know it was a yes or no. You could have said yes or no. The conversation flowed so well that I kind of overlooked that part. You know, there's so many people talking at one time.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it just, I wrote how I took things in while I was there. At one point, there was a time in which other people became facilitators of the conversation.
Oh, wow.
And I sat back and observed and observed.
It's interesting. That's interesting. Wow.
So it went pretty well, and you mentioned also that I should have reversed the observe and reflect part of the paper. I'll give you that, but I'll give you that, but you should have done that. It was interesting. It was like maybe 10 of my closest friends.
Wow.
And you know, it's males, females, and we just do that a little often at each other's house, and we just have these discussions on abortion as well.
reflect questions, I think it's impossible to ask these two questions and just get a yes or no.
Oh, yeah, no,
They are actually good reflect.
true.
questions.
Now-
Well, in fact, if someone says, was there ever a time, and then they say yes, then you are naturally gonna say, well, tell us about it.
Well, there were a few people that said no, and a few people that said yes, so I had to ask a question right there because, some people wanted to elaborate a little bit more than they needed to.
Mhm.
And by me throwing that question again, it sort of kind of narrowed it down a little bit more in
Yeah.
that conversation. And as far as the closing, they still wanted to talk, and yeah, they still wanted to talk, and there was the thank you for coming, thank you for participating in this assignment for me, but there was still some questions, and there always will be questions when it comes to this subject.
Absolutely.
Gun violence. So, I mean, especially now since now we have concealed weapons here in Illinois, and that's another issue that we probably also check.
That could be another, yeah.
John, I have a question on this. Facilitating, is the goal to be behind the scene? Also, are you influencing the conversation? Those are my two questions. Because just going back, she said she let the group know beforehand. But should we be behind the scene where they really don't know we are facilitating the meeting? And is it influencing the discussion?
Well, first of all, if you are in a quote formal or even a semi-formal training setting, it is expected for you to be the facilitator of the conversation. In a more informal setting, of course, such as a group of friends meeting, and let's say that the group of friends that meet once a month, whatever, they just open it up. It is not required of you to necessarily announce yourself as the facilitator of the group. You just might have this sort of technique in your head and use it to help guide the conversation without ever telling anybody that you are, in fact, guiding it.
With that said, let's say it's a formal meeting. You are not the facilitator, but you have a vested interest. And just utilize this tool. I would imagine everyone is not trained to know the process. Would you be influencing the outcome of the meeting to make sure it's
Real good question, and of course you edge up on some ethical issues as well. It is true that you influence it by the questions you ask. In other words, we could have had a totally different conversation about gun violence in Chicago with another different set of questions. And therefore, what this is trying to do, the format, the technique, is help you become self-conscious about what's my own frame of reference as I am designing and leading this particular conversation in this particular setting. And another facilitator, with having thought through a set of questions based upon sensitivities to the particular audience, it might be the same subject, but it might have been a different conversation entirely. It might have gone in this direction rather than that direction. It really doesn't matter, except for you, though, as the quote leader, invisible that you are, be self-aware of what it is that you're doing. Those of you who've been through the research seminar, you may recall it being said, your frame of reference will influence the research you learn. And this is similar to it. The question you ask will determine the responses you get.
And like you're saying, influence it, because if we take with one of these questions, would you feel better if somebody was attacking you if you had a gun? Well, see, now you're kind of
Yeah.
leading them to,
Yeah.
I feel better if I have one.
Yeah.
Rather than asking them, do you want everybody to have them? Well, no. But-
Yes.
So then depends on the question.
Oh, and you raise another real good point. Even the inflection in your voice will make a difference. So you've got, particularly on loaded questions. I did gun violence loaded.
I took a shot.
But I hope you knew what I'm there.
You know, something, you stated something that's key important research seminar, your research, the data you pull up influence your research. And something like this, is the question you pull up somewhere, you are, well, influence the outcome, that's what you said. You're influencing the outcome. So my question is, how productive would that information be? And are you looking at it from one lens and you're probably missing out on something?
Absolutely.
Influence the outcome.
Absolutely, Richard. You're right on target. Therefore, you really got to make these questions as open-ended as possible. You also really have to be prepared to have people say things that surprise you and allow your intrigue with that surprise to go with it. And no conversation probably ever exactly goes the way you planned it. But without a plan, the conversation doesn't go anywhere. So, well, I'm exaggerating. But now we're talking about facilitating learning. So we're talking about you're having a learning objective for this group on this topic. And you kind of want them to have a particular kind of conversation, or at least stay within a certain vein or arena to have the conversation. But when you're living with a group of friends, that's a different matter. Here, in a learning environment, I mean, an intentional learning environment,
As I look at, sorry.
No, I'm just saying, if it was more of a formal setting, perhaps these questions would not have been asked this particular way, because I was so familiar with everyone in the group, and we've had these discussions many a time. So that's why I was able to not really plan this whole conversation. It was more, sort of came off more spontaneous in a way. I didn't have the paper before me.
Yep.
I didn't have a recorder. I just remember most of the conversation that went on.
And that's why it's called guided conversation and not controlled conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it doesn't go, the way you plan. You know, it's fluid. It's not.
And it wasn't much alcohol served.
Well,
I must say that as I read the discussion board, without exception, I felt like every one of you had a good experience trying this process. And even if you said, it was hard to get the objectives stated, you still had a great experience. Even if you said I didn't do all the levels, you still had a good experience. Most of you, the experiential objective, it didn't happen, and you could see that in most of it.
last comment, unless you have other questions, but we're getting into a break. What we are, the other extreme from quote guided conversation or guided discussion is the situations where, and we've all been in it, we've all done it, and there are times where it's okay. But what drives me up the wall is the instructor will have made a presentation or shown a video or, a PowerPoint, and then will say, well, what do you think? That conversation will go wherever the first person who says something thinks. And then it goes that way. It's an unguided conversation. It's not a bad conversation. It's just unguided. We're talking about guided, which means that you have a purpose in mind other than just shooting the breeze. And I can shoot the breeze as well as the next guy, but when you want to do learning, you have something in mind beyond, what do you think?
Now, when you showed us.
What do you think?
I can really just say, but when you showed us that video,
Yeah.
I think on the first week,
Mm-hmm.
and you asked us shortly after the video, what do you think? And then you guided it. Those questions you gave us, what was one of the characters' names? What did we notice about it? Because you didn't let the conversation just go.
No, I did not let it go all over. I did guide it, and that was a demonstration of the guided method. Absolutely.
We did a exercise in my undergrad where the professor did a guided conversation, and he gave the class, broke us into two, but we all had to do two papers, one on people for legalizing marijuana, and the other, and you had to do another paper against legalizing marijuana. But then when you got to class, the groups didn't know what side they were going to be on. So you either had to be the one supporting it, or you had to be the one against it, but you had to be prepared to argue both ways. So he guided the conversation between the two groups that were established last minute, based on this top controversial topic, you know, just like gun control, marijuana. So it was pretty neat, just like you're saying, somebody guides it, and it actually was quite fun.
Do you have another comment or question? Oh, okay. You do.
Okay.
Right.
When you come back,
Oh, yes.
the people who studied the law 12 chapters, the one that studied chapter 4, would you sit at that table? I'll put the number 4 on that table. If you study chapter 5, sit at this table, 6 at this table, 7 at this table, 8 at this table. Okay, so you're going to sit with the other person that had that.
Okay, 15-minute break. Be back at 10:50.
Associates told me to do an argumentative speech. That's another one that everybody all riled up. You have to pick something that you know is going to get people riled up.
That's recorded.
This is a
Right. Did it go well for you?
Yeah.
Better?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, right. Tried. You're probably ready for this.
I was chapter 5. Don't ask, it's embarrassing. 5.
Generation.
I told you, math and numbers are not my thing.
Well, I'm glad that you
I stole it from an American website. That was just table of contents. One I didn't do for that.
little lines.
Yeah.
I would have done that, but I didn't.
And I have trouble saying, because I'm not an expert at Excel, but I'm turning it in.
Yes.
But,
Chapter one.
like, when I look at this, I should have censored them.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Not yet, keep them for now.
I got a copy, so
Okay. Then I'll take,
I don't forget.
yeah.
Did you want the table of contents one too?
Yeah, and help me to read that.
It was the first time I said, oh, no, I was going to take that. I left it at home. Day that I agree.
Okay. So what we're going to do the rest of the morning, and we have an hour, just a little, we have an hour, okay? So we're going to learn how to do participatory presentations as we've experimented with them, and colleagues of ours have experimented with them. And then have you play with creating your own participatory presentation using the Rockwell chapter that you have charted. And then I'm going to, hopefully we'll have time for each one of you to share one insight out of the Rockwell chapter so that you can have others people know kind of what's key in that chapter. Because we're not studying this book in depth, but this book has really got lots of helpful things to say about adult learning. And you've got inside your own chapter, but now you have a chance. Some of you are interested in technology right now, and the others aren't, but maybe later you'll discover you are to go right into that chapter. And then just a bit of reflection on the approach at the end. So, presentations. What I want to do is talk about in terms of this presentation with you, I want to talk about participatory presentations that create sticky messages. In other words, that people would remember things later. Do you remember the learning pyramid that we did? And at the top of the pyramid was presentations, and it had about what percent that people would remember after a presentation 3 months from now. Do you remember? 5% of what we said. You might have gone out and even done, But maybe they remember the key point. Who knows? So what is it that can help presentations be more effective? So why do you think presentations are important? When you think of, you sit and listen to presenters, you're asked to do presentations, why are they important in your mind?
Because they give you some insight into something you want to know.
Okay, so you listen because you hope that you're going to learn something, some kind of insight about something that you've got a question about, something you want to know.
I think presentations serve as a guide to the learning process, so I think people take you along that kind of learning journey with the presentation.
Okay, so a good presenter helps guide you through it, okay? All right. Anything else that comes to you as why presentations are important?
Sometimes in presentations, they'll have a PowerPoint, which will be, for me, I retain more when I visually see things.
Good.
So it depends on the person's learning styles.
Okay.
On how they.
So how can presentations are stronger when they have visuals, and PowerPoints are helpful quite often in terms of being visuals, unless they have 100 words on PowerPoint all the way through, right?
Yeah.
So how do they help you have visuals? And actually, when you look at this session, you'll find a file on how to give effective PowerPoint presentations. That's not what I'm going to do right at the moment. But visuals are very key. Okay, so as a presenter, you're trying to present certain ideas and you hope to engage people in participating in that idea. And as a facilitator, you know the importance of participation in dialogue in terms of helping it to stick and helping people to remember. And as an image change agent, as we talked about image